Hi guys, Asmo here, and today I have for you the Explosive Grenade Mercenary starter build. This is basically a leveling build for the Mercenary, whether you're playing Witch Hunter or the Gemelin Legionnaire. This is going to get you through the campaign very quickly, it's going to be very fun, and you're going to be able to start blasting maps in no time. This build is very satisfying. The main pros of it are that it has great clear, high damage, and a very satisfying playstyle, because the explosions overlapping, detonating it this on top of the boss, like nuking the boss down with your combos, or like certain enemies have really great animations when they explode or their chunks are flying around. So it's very fun to play, and it is very strong. And the cons are basically that it has a little bit of a slow start, which is the Act 1, the beginning especially, before you get to your grenades, before you get to certain key passes that you unlock with levels. And then it also requires some aiming, and if you don't like aiming and deliberate targeting with your abilities, then it might not be for you as well. In this video I'm going to show you lots of gameplay from my leveling journey. I finished the campaign, it was extremely fun. You're going to see we're melting the bosses, it's so fun to play. I really like the build, and I also made the build guide on Mobalytics because it's probably the best place to share the builds right now before we have POE, because it has a really nice section for the skills and most importantly the passive skill tree. So you can see the link in the description, which is going to link to this guide, which I'm going to be using to guide you basically through the leveling process, and everything is written here and described one by one. So let's start with the skills so that you know basically what we're going to be doing as you're playing. In the beginning, your initial setup for the early leveling in Act 1 should look like this. You should have fragmentation rounds with cold infusion and lightning infusion for extra damage, then permafrost bolts with pierce and ice bite, and then also explosive grenade with scatter shot and fire infusion. You want to try to clear as much with the explosive grenade because that's going to do the most damage if you aim it properly. So you basically want to shoot it ahead of yourself and then run through it. The monster chases you and then it explodes, right? So that's how you want to use it, or basically shoot ahead of the monsters so that they run into it and then it explodes. It takes a little bit of a you have to get used to it. It takes a little bit of a skill, but once you do it, it's going to be very quick. And then of course you have the other shots, right? So you have the permafrost bolts, which you use to freeze the enemies, and then as soon as you freeze someone, you swap to fragmentation rounds and then you shoot them for a massive multiplier to your damage that will basically explode like half of an HP bar of a rare monster or like a big chunk from a boss. So the fragmentation rounds is basically used as a combo with permafrost bolts. You can also experiment and change the supports around. So you could, for example, put, instead of pierce, you could put cold infusion into permafrost bolts. So you can have permafrost, cold infusion, ice bite for maximum damage for single target. And you could, for example, swap that for a boss fight if you want. And then fragmentation rounds with lightning infusion. You could also have brutality instead of lightning infusion if you don't have any sources of elemental damage. And for example, you can use double barrel for extra, like double tapping with the fragmentation rounds. And then after you get a Herald, I would recommend getting Herald of Ash instead of Herald of Ice, because we're going to be scaling out the fire damage later, and that's going to be most useful. You can also experiment with Flash Grenade whenever you get that. For example, Flash Grenade plus Brutality plus a Ruthless setup if you want more crowd control, especially against bosses, but I found it pretty unnecessary. I simply focused on doing damage and I didn't need that. Then in Act 2, to your setup, you're going to add two crucial skills: Gas Grenade and a bit later Explosive Shot. So Gas Grenade you want to link initially with Corrosion and Martial Tempo or Magnified Effect for more AoE, whichever one you prefer. Martial Tempo is going to give you a little bit more single target damage because you're going to be able to dish them out quicker, and then Magnified Effect is going to give you a little bit more clear and more consistency with that. You can alternate between throwing the grenades now. Basically you throw Explosive Grenade and then Gas Grenade, and they will both explode. The Explosive Grenade will detonate the cloud and it will do massive damage. And as soon as you get the Explosive Shot, you can basically ditch your fragmentation rounds and permafrost bolts completely. Congratulations, you're now a Grenadier. So with the Explosive Shot, you want to link it to utility supports that will gonna make it so that you don't have to reload, or you reload quicker. So because we don't care about the damage of the Explosive Shot, it's just there to detonate your grenades. So you want to link it with Double Barrel and ammo conservation. And that is basically going to make sure that you have the highest uptime and you can detonate very quickly the grenades that you're throwing. You want to detonate grenades whenever you're shooting ahead of you and the monsters are blocking your way to explode them as quickly as possible. Also, whenever you think that the monsters will run out of the range and the AoE of the grenades. And also if you just want to hit the boss because you debuffed them and you want to detonate them before the boss moves out of the range of the grenades. After the explosive shot, we're going to add another grenade to the setup, which is going to be the voltaic grenade. So voltaic grenade we want to link with conduction and lasting shock, and that is going to basically allow you to shock the target. This is particularly useful for rares or uniques that you want to debuff to increase your damage with your other grenades. And then a last grenade that we're going to add to our setup is the oil grenade. It slows the enemies and it also applies exposure, fire exposure 20%. Basically it's going to increase your fire damage, which is going to be most of the damage that you're going to be dealing with your other weapons. And then you can link it with something like persistence for increased duration, as well as strip away for the increased exposure. So strip away is going to increase the exposure by 30%, which is going to make it 26% instead of 20% exposure. And then the persistence is going to make the debuff last longer, but it's also going to increase the fuse duration. However, with the oil grenade, it doesn't really matter because the oil grenade explodes as soon as it hits the enemy. So you simply hit the enemy with it, or you can use it to pre-stack the ground before the boss spawns. So that's why we can afford to increase the duration of that. So our final setup is basically going to look like this. We're going to have explosive grenade with the scatter shot, with primal armament, with magnified effect, and then if you have another socket, which I had before I finished the campaign, I would use inspiration. And in general you can use inspiration whenever you have severe mana issues, but I would really recommend just like prioritizing crafting your flasks and getting some mana leech so that you can maximize your damage instead. And then we have gas grenade, which we link with corrosion, fire infusion, and demolisher. So fire infusion is a little bit better on the gas grenade than something like primal armament because it doesn't convert damage by default, so we simply do added damage to it and we use the increase to the converted damage for the explosive grenade instead. That's going to basically maximize your damage this way, and it's going to of course remove the armor from the enemies. Then we have oil grenade, which we link with strip away, persistence, and martial tempo for just some quicker attacks. This is the least priority socket. And then we have a voltaic grenade with conduction, lasting shock, and a lightning infusion for even more lightning damage and even stronger chance to get 20% shock on the enemy. Then we have explosive shot with all utility sockets, so we basically have a double barrel, ammo conservation, and then nimble reload for even faster reloads. And then we have Herald of Ash and Wind Dancer. If you have enough spirit, make sure that you have Wind Dancer as well. It's a great defensive buff, and then we can link them with clarity and vitality for mana and life regen, as well as herbalism and cannibalism. Herbalism gives you more healing from your flasks, and cannibalism gives you some life recovery on kill. So that is the basic setup. The sockets are listed in the guide on the mobalytics in order of priority, so you want to make sure that you're getting them in order. The last one is the least important, the first one is the most important, and you basically just go through them in order. And now let's go through the passive tree, which is very, very interesting. I've seen a lot of people path towards stuff on the left side here. Some people path for these nice nodes here that give you like movement speed, some projectile damage, as well as some mana flask recovery. This is also nice if you have like real mana issues, but it does cost a lot of passives. Like it looks deceptive because it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like 5 travel nodes to pick up all these things, but it looks so close, right? Meanwhile, you can move like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 travel nodes, and you're almost there with some other sockets, or like 5 travel nodes to this. It looks like this looks much further than this little cluster, but it's not that far as well, this pathing. Like it looks deceptively far, but it's actually not that far. So here's how we're pathing. We've got the projectile damage, and you can go for attack speed, or initially you can go for projectile damage, which is going to be slightly better in Act 1. But then later, after Act 1, basically once you become a grenadier full time, we respec to the attack speed. And then as we're pathing, initially we're going for the ricochet for the projectile nodes, because we're still using our permafrost bolts and the shotgun. So while we're doing that, we're pathing through projectile damage, and we're rushing basically down. So you rush straight through the projectiles, straight down for the adrenaline rush. This is the first thing you want to rush to, and then instantly for instant reload and volatile grenades. So this is the the place you rush to. If you're still using permafrost bolts, you use instant reload, and the moment you get explosive shot, you unspec these nodes because you're gonna be relying solely on the grenades. So that's gonna be no longer necessary. And instead, we wanna get this thing, right? So we wanna get the grenadier and cluster bombs. So after rushing to this area, picking up these passives, the next thing we pick up is the grenadier and the cluster bombs. This is super important. This is gonna basically turn this build into like a very, very strong character. When you pick up these passives, you're gonna feel much, much stronger. You're gonna like see, okay, this, I see why we're playing this now, okay? And then after that, you can pick up the colossal weapon as well as overwhelm, which is gonna increase your damage, give you some AoE. This is a lot of damage increase, and it's gonna also give you the option of pathing to hard to kill, which is gonna give you regen and life recovery. So if you're struggling with life recovery, if you're dying because you're like slowly losing HP, you cannot recover it fast enough, hard to kill is gonna help you with that. If you're better at dodging enemies, you're not gonna need that. And then also, once you swap to full-time grenadier, you unspec these projectile nodes and instead you spec the cooldown recovery rate and the AoE, which is gonna come from here. If you need more defense, you path through these nodes. This is gonna give you increased armor and evasion rating, stun threshold, so you're not gonna get stunned as often, and also battle hardened, which is really good, more armor evasion, reduced damage from crits, and also strength and dexterity, which is also very valuable and not to be overlooked because attributes are very important. So after this early section, we're gonna path straight down and we have a couple of choices. So first we're gonna pick up, of course, the advanced munitions because this is gonna help our shock and ignite as well as chill and freeze early on. So this is very important early on. And then after that, we either path to repeating explosives or we go to the left side here. I would definitely recommend first picking up repeating explosives and then making our choice to go left or right. After repeating explosives, you can go left if you need more defense, basically, because that's going to allow you to pick up the general's bindings, which is going to give you extra armor based on the amount of evasion that you have. So you can prioritize evasion a little bit above armor and then basically get that extra armor from that evasion. And if you're pathing here, then of course you want to go the extra 2 points and grab the smoke inhalation and incendiary. Otherwise, you can skip completely this left section for now, and you can go for attack speed, and then you can path to the right side. There are crit nodes here, there are crit nodes here, and there are also crit nodes that we're pathing next to. There are crit nodes here and here. We skip them until we finish the campaign. Basically, anything that says crit on it, do not pick it up until you finish the campaign. This is more of a late game thing, but I'm just showing you why we are pathing this way and what are other useful things that we're also going to be picking up, because it would look very weird if I was just pathing here and picking up only like a couple of things, right? But we're pathing this way because there's also huge amount of crit available. But we're pathing to the right side mainly because of the crit and also the movement speed, which I'm going to show in a moment. But let's go one thing at a time. So we got the attack speed, which is also going to give you blind. Blind basically decreases the amount of evasion and accuracy the enemies have. So you have more evasion against those enemies that are blinded. Basically, you take less damage and it's easier to hit them. And then we're pathing here for the forces of nature and emboldened avatar. That's going to give you more shock, more ignite, and more electrocute, and early on more freeze if you're still using permafrost bolts, but you probably shouldn't by this point. And then we have also the forces of nature for the penetration and just generic increased elemental damage, since we're doing damage of like all three elements pretty much, depending also on your weapon. If you have like lots of like flat elemental damage, is going to help you. So this is a very, very nice cluster. And then we're pathing to the right for the acceleration. So movement speed and increased skill speed, which is basically attack speed and cast speed. After that, we're pathing up here. We're picking up the catalysis, which is elemental damage as well as physical damage from hits taken as elemental, which is very important and very useful, but you do need to make sure to keep up your resistances. Of course, the higher your resistances, the better this becomes. And then we don't pick up this early because you're going to have really hard time filling all of these jewel sockets with good jewels. You're not going to find a lot of good jewels early on. You can look at trade for something that's going to give you like 1 or 2 decent stats, but we don't need to pick this up. This is just something to show you later on. You want to get it because jewels in the end game are very, very powerful, and this pathing gets a lot of jewel sockets, which is very, very nice. After that, we path up and get the movement speed, more evasion, more movement speed, all the good stuff that we need. And then tons of damage from the harness the elements. So this is going to give you like at least 45% increased damage on bosses, because you're going to have at least 3 ailments on them, probably more, depending on how they're counted. If like electrocute and shock are counted as different ailments, then that's going to be another 15%, right? If you electrocute someone with your galvanic grenades, so that's going to be very, very strong as well. And after that, we're also pathing here. This is really, really powerful. 50% increased fire damage while affected by Herald of Ash, and we're scaling mostly fire damage. And of course, this gives you access to this massive crit wheel that's here. The rest of the nodes, this, and this are basically crit, and that's what you pick up after the campaign. So that's the passive skill tree. It's pretty straightforward. In terms of the ascendancies, if you're playing Gemin Legionnaire, definitely a rush toward like being able to use multiple of the same support skill gems, right? That's the important part. But as a witch hunter, which is what I played, I would recommend first going for Zealous Inquisition, or you can go for the Pitiless Killer if you don't need the clear and you definitely want more damage against bosses, and then also get the Judge, Jury, and Executioner from your second lab. You can also get the Explode from the first lab, and then after doing the second lab, unspec it and pick up Judge, Jury, and Executioner by basically picking this and this. So those three are basically in whatever order you want early on, but I would prioritize the Zealous Inquisition first. And then after that, the fourth one is probably going to be Witchbane if you intend on bossing, and if not, then it's going to be something like either Obsessive Rituals or the Weapon Master if you're intending on like taking advantage of the weapon swaps, which could be really good actually if we're going to be like weapon swapping. I saw Vudijo had a tech, for example, for swapping to Leap Slam. That could be something that you can use if you're getting stuck in like between enemies, right? But I never really had that issue because they simply just explode. I simply just kill them. So, that's not an issue if you're doing a lot of damage. And now let's talk about gear. So upgrading your gear makes a massive difference in PoE 2, and you should always spend your currency during the campaign and try to craft the best items you can. So keep an eye on which items are your weakest items and try to find upgrades for those. And basically your priorities while upgrading the gear are number one above everything else is your crossbow. Ideally, you want the Bombard crossbow from Act 3 onwards. That crossbow is going to give you an extra projectile, and extra overlapping projectiles with the big AoE that we have are going to deal more single target damage and increase your clear. So the Bombard crossbow is very important. It's also a big difference between 2 projectiles and 3 projectiles, so it's even more important for Mercenary compared to something like Deadeye. So I highly recommend getting the Bombard crossbow. You want to make sure that you're crafting either physical damage or elemental damage. It doesn't really matter actually. You can also get the increases to a level of projectile gems. That's also very, very strong. So like if you can get like +3 to projectile skill gems, super powerful. Physical damage, flat elemental damage. You can also get attack speed. You can also get mana leech. All of those things are really good. So make sure to always salvage socketed and quality items so that whenever you get an upgrade, you can simply just slap 2 sockets on it and put runes and quality it up as high as you can so that the crossbow can be as strong as it can be, so that it can carry you for a long time. When it comes to the runes that you want to put in your crossbow, those would be the increased physical damage runes or the mana leech runes for a physical crossbow. And if you have any other crossbow, in general, you cannot go wrong with the flat elemental runes. So that's also something you can use in them. The second item slot in terms of priority would be the boots. So prioritize crafting boots until you have movement speed on them. Boots are super, super important. I put here in this guide on the Mobalytics the movement speed bonuses you can get depending on the item level of those boots. And so at level 1 you can get 10% movement speed. From item level 15 you can get 15% movement speed. From item level 30 you can get 20, and then from item level 50 you can get 25% movement speed. So make sure that you are prioritizing upgrading your boots once you hit one of those breakpoints to maximize your movement speed. And the next item slot, super, super important, very, very powerful, especially during leveling, rings. So highly recommend picking up all of the rings that you find, especially all of the resistance rings like Sapphire, Ruby, Topaz, Amethyst, and Prismatic, and also Iron rings, and slap transmutations and augmentations on them and fish for good mods. The mods that you want are flat physical and flat elemental damage to attacks, mana leech, and of course life and resistances. So the rings can give you a huge amount of damage. Same with gloves. Gloves are the other item slot that I would highly prioritize crafting, and they can give you flat damage like physical and elemental. They can give you leech, they can give you mana leech, and they can also give you attack speed. So gloves are one of the best items to try upgrading if you need more damage. The remaining gear, of course, you want to prioritize getting as much resistances as well as life as you can, and ideally you want to always identify magic and rare items that are hybrid armor and evasion bases. Armor and evasion hybrids are going to be the best for you because of our passive skill tree, which scales both armor and evasion, and also the requirements. So that's why I would prioritize that. And you can also, of course, craft on these bases, right? So craft on armor and evasion bases whenever you see a good one, and just fish for good mods. And then if you hit something really good, then you can craft it further. If you can get extra spirit as well on your body armor or amulet, this will allow you to run not only Herald of Ash, but also Wind Dancer together with the support gems like Clarity, Vitality, Cannibalism, and Herbalism for even more sustain. When it comes to exalts and exalting your gear, the number one thing is to spend your exalts on the crossbow. So once you get a good crossbow upgrade, let's say you transmute, augmentation, and regal it, and it hits pretty well, then slap 3 exalts on it without thinking, right? It's gonna be just the most bang for your buck that you can get, the most damage that you can get. So I would highly recommend slamming exalts on your crossbows. And then secondary would be good rings and good gloves that are gonna last you for multiple levels. Other than that, save your exalts for the next crossbow upgrade and the next good ring or glove that you're gonna find. And the last thing when it comes to gear would be the flasks and the charms. So for flasks, you want to make sure that you get on the suffix either gaining charges per second, that's the most powerful modifier you can get, gains charges per second, or more charges or uses fewer charges, right? So you want to make sure that you increase your charges for boss fights. Like more charges on kill and stuff like that doesn't really matter while you're clearing. You should never be running out of your flasks. It's going to be most important on bosses. So maximize your flask charges for bosses. And then also on the prefix, you want something like increased amount of recovered or increased amount of recovered while on low life or low mana. And then for charms are more situational. So you can use charms for the resistances that they give you, whatever is your lowest resistance. But I would highly recommend getting a antidote charm as soon as you can for Act 3, which deals with poison. In Act 3, you're going to have a lot of poison damage. It's going to be one of the highest like damage sources that you're going to be taking, and I definitely recommend running around with antidote charm. Just if you don't want to like worry about it and think about it, just make sure you have something against poison, and that's going to help you survive, especially tough fights like Viper, Napuatsi, or whatever she's called. That's going to be a very important item to have for that. And that's basically it when it comes to setting up the build. The character is very fun to play. Your playstyle is basically going to be throwing explosive grenades, and if your gear is good enough, one shot of explosive grenades will kill any pack. If you don't have enough damage, then you can either shoot the explosive grenade twice, or you can shoot the explosive grenade and then after that gas grenade. And because the gas grenade has a shorter fuse duration, the gas grenade is going to release the gas cloud first, and then the explosive grenade is going to explode and detonate it, killing everything in range. If that's still not enough damage, then you can add a quick oil grenade. For example, if you're shooting against like a rare or like an essence mob or something like that, you can also use that oil to slow the monsters and let them stack together and then explode them. And then against bosses, your setup is basically you throw the oil grenade on the ground. Make sure to do that before the boss spawns. The oil will cover the ground and the boss will stand in it while it spawns. Then you throw a couple of gas grenades so that they can explode when the boss spawns and start removing the armor, and then throw a couple of voltaic grenades to basically shock the enemy as soon as they're up. And after that, they are debuffed, they're primed, they're sitting in a gas cloud, and just start spamming explosive grenades and alternating those with gas grenades and detonating them whenever you think the boss might move out of it. And you basically just keep spamming your explosive and gas grenades, only refreshing the shock and oil whenever necessary, whenever you see that those buffs are basically running out. And that's basically how you play this character. The beginning of Act 1 will feel a little bit slow, but when you get access to like grenade specific passives, which comes with levels, and when you get access to explosive shot and a couple of grenades, it's gonna feel amazing. I definitely recommend this build if you're like a beginner, if you wanna just have an easy time during the campaign. I had a great time. I highly recommend like pay attention to your gear, craft your gear, really engage with the crafting system, really like salvage the gear for artificers orbs and blacksmith whetstones and armor scraps, and just upgrade your gear as well as you can, and it's gonna make a huge difference. It's gonna make your experience way better. And that's basically it. I hope you enjoyed this guide. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, and also make sure to check out the Mobilitics guide, which is going to be linked in the description. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye bye.